Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 18 with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Not too much. How are you this morning?
Awesome. Feeling good.
Good.
8.5 hours of sleep. Could barely get through the condensed games of Major League Baseball last night when I got home from work. Ready to rock. So
How many of them do you go through?
I watched all the condensed games.
Oh,
So
wow.
they're about 7 minutes long, I think. So I'll watch all the condensed games when I get home from work. Obviously, it's just highlights. If I can stay up, I'll watch the Mariners game in its entirety if I can. But yeah, it's a way for me to just get my baseball fix, and not a whole lot of analysis going on with the condensed games, but it's makes me happy. I enjoy it.
I've been looking at the game stories on MLB.
Mm-hmm.
They're video, but it'll give you the pitcher, the hitter, the inning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a way that I found you can kind of see the plays. It'll show not just home runs, but it'll also show strikeouts, the last out. It'll show defensive plays, like just kind of the key moments. I enjoy those, but I'll have to check out a condensed game.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's just an easy way to consume the big plays of the game and the home runs, and it's certainly the other parts of the game are the parts that I enjoy the most, kind of the more monotonous pitch to pitch, but this is a way for me to consume and not have to spend my entire 24 hours watching baseball.
Yeah.
So for today, we're going to go over some lineup questions and strategy, mostly with regards to head-to-head. We'll talk a little bit about our TGFBI team, which last look we were third, I think.
You got an update, friend. We're first.
Are we really?
Yes.
Nice. So we're first in TGFBI. What do you know? I love it. We'll talk a little bit about pitcher injuries and some of the shorter outings that we see, and how to build your fantasy team now that baseball is, I think, changing and seeing pitchers go through the order twice instead of 3 times. Do a little player analysis. Aaron will highlight a pitcher and a hitter, and we'll do a little bit of a deep dive and then talk about what metrics we look at this early in the season and why we don't tend to dig too deep. And then some stories about last week and what we saw and what we did. And then we'll move to open forum. And for the listeners, I think Tuesday, Wednesday, midweek will be our long form podcast, where you might see a couple hours worth of content. And then Saturday will be a recap where we look into some of the results from the week, touch base on anything important, and just kind of check in. So that's going to be the format moving forward. Any interesting coffee stories from last week?
I did roast a little coffee for cupping to follow up last time we talked. I'll share some more details on that to come. And then that was good. I had to reacclimate myself to the roaster, but I just am enjoying a seasonal coffee from Starbucks that I actually bought from Target. We have some really interesting coffees working in a different area of the supply chain. I see a lot of coffees that I kind of go, where is that going? Where is that going? And the other facet is that Laura and I both used to work for Starbucks, and Laura no longer does. And so one of the benefits of working in the company is you get coffee every week. So our income in coffee has been cut by 50%.
Yeah.
And I send quite a bit of coffee to my daughter, who's a coffee lover as well. So I'm having trouble staying ahead of the curve. So I bought some coffee, and I bought one of the coffees I saw us producing at the plant. It's a spring coffee. And it's just really, I've just really been enjoying it. It has 3 different origins in it. It has some Brazil, it's 40% washed African, not natural, just a washed African, and 25% Central America. The 3 different regions, so it has a nice complexity, really bright acidity, no like harsh earthiness at all, but it's on the darker side of medium. So it's just a nice round, smooth cup. Just been enjoying the heck out of that, and just that multi-region complexity.
Awesome. So so full disclosure, I work for UPS, and and I work at night for the most part. And I couldn't deal with not having a coffee maker at work. So my buddy and I went in on a metal filter, like metal cone, basic coffee maker at work. And I've been getting, so the El Salvador honey that I talked about previously, they still have. And I bought another bag of it and brought
Thanks
it.
for the picture of that, by the way.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's, man, I'm really impressed. It's been really, really, really awesome. So it's my work coffee right now. I put it in the Chemex, but I admittedly did not actually make a Chemex. But it's been absolutely phenomenal. And I guess the only thing I want to add is coffee at the right time, good coffee at the right time in the right place makes life about 1,000 times better.
It's true.
There are nights, so I'm a supervisor for UPS, and there are nights where I have to wait for drivers who are in inclement weather or driving a route that they're not used to come back literally 3-4 hours later than what was planned. And thankfully, given the fact that I don't have a whole lot of work to do other than supervise and shoot a couple of emails, I can listen to baseball games and kind of hang out. But to have a really beautiful cup of coffee to go along with whatever it is that I'm reading or listening to just has completely changed. No, I'm already happy with my job. I enjoy it. But to have that wonderful cup of coffee to go along with it just makes, I'll stay there as long as they want me to stay there, basically, because I have this beautiful cup of coffee.
What were you drinking before?
Water, or
Okay.
Maybe a cup of tea or even a soda once in a while, like that kind of thing. So there was, you can stay awake, but it's just very, very different. It just really increased the quality of my life. And it brought into light the fact that coffee just makes life a hell of a lot better. And specifically a really beautiful kind of limited coffee like this El Salvador honey that I've been drinking.
That's true.
So anyways, love coffee, super happy, makes life better. I think we all know that, but it's always fun to share those stories. So our first baseball question for this episode is, we're about, 2 weeks in, just about 2 weeks into the season. There are a lot of questions right now being tossed around about roster construction. How do you build a roster? What's your strategy in setting your lineup? I'm just I guess at first glance, what's your first thought with regards to these first couple of weeks? What are some of the things you did with your own roster and lineup? What might you have done differently if you could go back and do it again?
Man, I was prepared to talk about your team.
You can talk about my team too. That's fine. You can go wherever you want.
No, I think things that I wrote down, my mindset is just to constantly acquire, especially pitching. To never, there's a mantra I've heard in the tossed around the MLB that you can never have enough pitching, and that's been applied to teams in recent seasons. I'm trying to think of the Dodgers are one. I think maybe you could say that about the Mariners right now. I mean, you see all the talent at the current big league level, and then you also see talent in the pipeline, and you think why, man, they have all this pitching talent, but there's this idea that you can never have enough. And I think I have adopted that mindset with my fantasy roster. I don't think you should ever stop mining for pitching, because I don't know. I just think there are more skills changes, and I think obviously we're dealing with a lot of attrition as well. And so you may think that you're deep, but 2 days later you might not be so deep. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. Is just be in that mindset of constantly acquiring. And it doesn't mean dropping 3-4 players a day, but you're constantly in the box score, you're constantly looking at velocity, you're constantly looking at usage, how are guys being used, just looking for skills changes, just always being mindful and looking in that just sort of acquiring mindset. And if someone posts someone you're interested on the trade block or whatever, even if you think you're good, asking about them, always being that acquiring mindset.
I agree. I think that so I picked up David Robertson, I think 3 days in. I saw him get one save with the Cubs. and picked him up. And I think that especially with regards to role and bullpen role, it's super important to understand that even if you valued a player at a decent place during the draft, that role means as much as skill does with regards to bullpen. One of the things that I've actually realized about myself was I was so much about skill and velocity and shape of pitch and all those sorts of things. But with bullpen, it's really about role. It has obviously you want a pitcher with great stuff and with great shape, but if they don't have a great role, it doesn't really matter, right? And you're gonna build on your ratios and maybe build on strikeouts. But in our league, because we both holds and saves are individual categories, it's 100% about whether they're going to accumulate those stats or not. So I do think in our league, a 16 team head to head, it's important to jump on some of those pitchers who have roles that will pick up saves and holds, specifically saves, as soon as possible. But I agree. I think that there's tons of pitching to be had. And if you pay attention to some of the first couple of performances or first couple of weeks, you can really mine for specifically SP 4, 5, and 6 and really solidify your roster before anyone else.
I find as well that they're use Houston as an example. They're known as a team that really gets the most out of player skill sets. We talked about Garrett Cole before on the pod. They have a lot of players that weren't highly touted as prospects who are contributing, pretty well at the big league level now. They're just known for treating an arsenal. So when I say this, I'm not just talking about technical changes or arsenal changes, but I think for me, there are teams that I trust how the reliever will be used, not necessarily just knowing he's in the 8th inning, but just knowing that they're going to use them in matchups where they feel they can be successful. They're not going to overuse them. They're not going to let them go too many days without pitching at all. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like there are teams that are better, and managers, skippers specifically, backed up by the front offices and the data, that I just trust that they're going to put him in a position to succeed. So you want those skills first, so that when they're put in that position, they make the most of it.
Right.
But I find myself shying away from teams where, even if the guy is talented and I kind of have an idea he might get a categorical advantage, I don't necessarily, if I'm on the fence, like, I don't know, I don't trust them to use him in a way to put him in a position to be successful. Do you find that as well?
I do. I think for me, it's a balance though. So I think about like Phil Maton or Phil Bickford as pitchers in organizations that are going to use them correctly, are going to like optimize their pitch mix. We're going to see the best of Bickford and Maton because they pitch for Houston and the Dodgers. Mm-hmm. If they end up in a role in the 7th or 8th where they're going to pick up holds, they're incredibly valuable. But up until this point, neither of them have really, stacked 20 holds in a season. We both know the skills are there, right? Both of them, like Maton has an incredible slider, and Bickford he was a 1st-round pick. We know he's talented. So yes, in that sense, I agree. I also roster Mark Melancon and David Robertson, neither of whom throw above 92. And, Melancon is lucky to get above 90, but they're both currently the closers for their teams. And so can I pick up 25 cheap saves by rostering? I trust the Cubs much more than I trust the Diamondbacks as far as, organizational philosophy with pitching. But I think it's a balance. I think you have to keep an eye on the middle relievers for a Tampa Bay or the Dodgers or Houston or the Giants or the Mariners, right? Like, I know their entire bullpen, because any one of those pitchers can pop. But I do think because we play fantasy, it's important to remember that there are pitchers on teams that we don't like, or we don't like their organizational philosophy, that are still going to pick up saves. Yeah. And they're worth something.
Sure.
Like, I'm nervous to start Melancon because Melancon may give up 4 runs and blow the save at any point in time. But if he gives me 25 saves, then it's a pitcher that I is worth having, which leads me to actually a question I had for you, which is, So we start 5 relievers in a head-to-head. How many relievers do you carry, and how do you build out that relief staff? Because I've changed my philosophy this year based on some of the things that I've learned over the previous couple of years.
I guess I would take issue with this, your first observation that we have 5 spots. I aim to start more than 5.
Sure, if you have an SPRP, absolutely.
Yeah, and I prioritize that so that you can maximize volume every day. And so that's my first point. And so I think this year I've tried to lean into followers. What used to be called a follower, you don't hear that as much anymore. You hear more like a piggyback, or just you hear guys being actively paired up. Example with the Dodgers, like Consolin and Tyler Anderson are paired up right now. So I've leaned into that, and then also getting multiple like multi-inning middle relievers who used to be starters or have that eligibility, to try to get a couple more of those guys to really just try to deepen the pen, and so you're not just starting five guys. That's my thought and approach, is just deeper.
So pushback for one, if you're doing that, you're reducing your ability to pick up saves and holds potentially, right?
Right.
And saves and holds are 2 of the 12 categories that we count. So I think that's one counter. The other one is,
hold on a minute. So if I'm starting 5 relievers and I'm starting 1 or 2 more who are also middle relief, how am I reducing my chances for saves and holds?
So I'm assuming that one of those is not starter eligible. If they're eligible, then that's fine. Then totally understood. Here's my other thought, though. I would argue that at minimum, 7 of the 16 managers in our league understand the value of a reliever that has starter eligibility, right? Which is why we saw Colin McHugh go round 4. So we saw Colin McHugh go round 4, who's an SPRP, who has the potential to pick up probably 15, 20 saves this year. We all know Colin McHugh has a really nice repertoire, is going to strike out probably 10 to 11 batters per 9, probably has an ERA under 3. He's a super valuable player, right? Because it's essentially free ratios and free holds, because you can start him in that starter position. So it's not the same advantage that it was 3 and 4 years ago, right? I literally won the league, whatever it was, 5 years ago, because I had a whole bunch of players to put in that starter position. So I agree with you that it's really great if you can have those players, right? You picked up Johan Duran because you were smart enough to see that he had great stuff, and you're able to put him in that SP position. I guess what I'm saying is it's valued at a place where it's no longer a secret. And obviously it's a huge advantage to have somebody in one of those positions that can pick up saves or holds for you. But I don't think that it's something that most of us can do at this point in time, unless you're willing to spend a really high pick to pick those players up. So if I'm looking at it more traditionally, and assuming that you might have one player who's able to sit in that role, and you're still building a bullpen with essentially 5 relievers per day per start, what do you do? So for me, to answer my own question, I hate relievers. I'm not interested in rostering a whole bunch of relievers. They frustrate me. I think that role is very manager specific and based on manager preference. And, there's tons and tons of relievers that can pick up holds. There are tons of guys on the waiver wire that are still good. But what I did was I added 1 extra roster spot because it's head to head. And what I want is the flexibility to evaluate where I'm at on a Friday with 3 days left in the week and say, okay, my competitor has 2 more saves than I do, and I have 2 more holds than he does. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that 3rd holds guy and plug in that 3rd saves guy in order to try to compete with my competitor. And what I found is there's a lot more, given just taking that one roster spot, I have a lot more flexibility, and I feel much more competitive because I'm able to do that. And it's something that I didn't value in the past. So I just think that there's some there's more depth to constructing a bullpen in a league like ours than I think I realized in the past. I just kind of dismissed relievers. I said, I'm going to pick the best 5. If I win holds, that's great. If I win saves, that's great. And I'm going to move on. But there was a lot more value to be had by digging a little bit deeper.
I mean, I hear what you're saying about MA. Are you really getting a competitive advantage by using an SP as an RP? You know, it's a well-known strategy. I don't think it's necessarily that it's a secret. I just think if you're able to, that's like everything else. If you can do it better, it's an advantage. And I think, and as much as I don't mean to diminish holds, because I'm very grateful to play in a league that has holds. As we talked about with Duran last week, like it would just be a shame to just for him not to have any value and playing a league format that doesn't reward him at all. Right. Because he has a lot to offer. So to be able to play in a format where you can garner some value for someone who doesn't have an exclusive hold on the 9th inning is, to me, just really rewarding. But at the same time, holds are even more random than saves. And there's so many things that have to fall in place. So if I can give myself over a 7-day period, if I can give myself 7 tries a day instead of 5 tries a day, to try to get holds. And then also, I think the other thing is from a roster construction standpoint, I'm carrying less starters and I'm replacing it with relievers who my competitors might have more starters than me, but I would imagine more times out they're lower on the talent or food chain, and they're starting those guys, and they might be hurting their ratios where I'm starting guys in middle relief who are coming in and maybe giving up a run every 3 appearances.
Right. So that's the
and so in some, I have another starter. I'm going to get 7 or 8 innings from these guys with really elite production. Now the new wrinkle this year is we have a starts minimum, so I'm having to manage around that as well. But yeah, it's definitely moving piece and moving target.
So that's the Brandon Young theory of like 5 years ago. So Brandon like 5 years ago, I think he had 1 or 2 starters, and everyone's like, what's Brandon doing? But he had a ton of relievers, right? His entire pitching staff was filled out with relievers that would give him 1, 2, 3 innings of great ratios. And he's kind of like very prototypical Brandon, kind of ahead of his time in trying to build his team out that way. I, on the other hand, went the other way this year.
Yes.
Knowing that we had our start minimums, and decided and that there are very few starters who actually go like 6, 7 innings.
Yeah.
Decided I was going to really value top line starters and try to find a competitive advantage in that way. And so rostering Scherzer, Rodon, Wheeler, Gilbert, Robbie Ray, even Matt Brash. Brash is more of the 5-inning guy, but I felt like it was a strategy that was zagging when everybody was zigging. We'll see how it plays out. But I did have on my episode notes like bulk versus ratios, because I think that it's really interesting to compare those 2 strategies. I think both of them work, and both of them, the big thing is you have to choose one.
Yeah, for sure.
You really have to choose one. You have to be all in with one or the other, because if you're more of a ratio team and I'm more of like a bulk innings, strikeouts type of team, if you're sitting in the middle or wishy-washy about it and you go against either of us, we're going to just destroy them in pitching, because you're going to have better ratios, and you're not going to win strikeouts against me. You're not going to win wins against me. You might win losses against me, but you're also not going to win whip, right? Because I'm just stacking like 1.1 whip over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So I do think you really have to be all in with one or the other to be successful this year. And I think it's changing rapidly given the way that teams are looking at pitching. So the other question I wanted to ask you with regards to pitching is, you know, I always think of my pitching staff as a 6-man staff in really any sort of fantasy league. And I like to have 4 or 5 of those pitchers be pitchers who give me a decent amount of innings and I can kind of count on, understanding that the last 1 or 2 places in the rotation are going to be either fungible or pitchers that I believe in their talent. And I think that they may give me somewhere between, I don't know, 4 and 6 innings per start with a decent amount of strikeouts. What is your strategy with regards to building a staff? Do you see it the same way? And how quick are you to move through some of like those 5th and 6th starters as you're building your roster?
I would say if I've committed to someone as a 5th or 6th, I'm not quick to move on because I probably value them pretty highly. My approach that I've shared on this pod, and I can't remember exactly what we talked about last week. I feel like some of these themes are repeating.
Sure.
But this idea of leaning into middle relief and kind of leaning into the way the real game is changing is kind of an evolution for me. Last year, my goal was to come into the year with like 8 or 9 starters. And I did that, but unfortunately, I mean, I had 3 Tommy John pitchers last year. And so very quickly it deteriorated. And that wasn't the sole reason I went away, but yeah, I just say that it's a change for me going away from being that super deep, because knowing that coming off the shortened season in 21, we had the 2020 pandemic season, and then going into 21, I anticipated there would be a lot of injuries, and I wanted to insulate myself. I didn't want to be left with replacement level starting pitchers. So I really wanted to have a lot of depth, and that was an area of focus for me. And I think when you saw it, when you looked at the end of year stats, when you were doing your off-season prep, I did lead the league in ERA and WHIP. So you could argue that it was successful, but there still was some attrition. I wasn't able to carry that many starters throughout the entire year. I was really carried by the frontline guys that I had. I had 5 guys, I think, who were legitimately very, very good. And then like 6 and 7. I don't remember exactly who was in those spots, but so yeah, I mean, that's my approach for 2022. As I've already shared, I won't repeat it. But in the past, I've been more where you're at, trying to go really deep with starters and just trying to out volume my competition in terms of quality and depth, and knowing that they're not going to be able to beat me in strikeouts. And honestly, part of my shift, Tino, is that I honestly didn't do as well as strikeouts as I felt like I could. I did do well in ERA and WHIP, but because of the quality of the pitchers that I had. But I struggled in wins and I've struggled in strikeouts. And I think that's part of why I would say I have talented pitchers, but there's certain categories that it's a flip of the coin from week to week.
For sure.
Of how I'm coming up, despite the quality of that I have. So, it's tinkering, and head to head is different, and you can't just set it, forget it for the whole week. You're constantly evaluating. So it's a format that continues to challenge me for sure. I was curious with you looking at your team last week, studying for the pod. Wanted to bring a couple questions about your team. You won saves, and you lost holds by 3. And I was just curious, do you just dismiss that as early season noise, or does that offer you any insight of where you think your team sits right now?
No, I lost a save not starting Ryan Tepera one day when obviously I should have. I think I was waiting to see how Bednar and Art Warren shook out as far as their role.
Yeah.
When I look at either of them, I look at them and I write them on a piece of paper. I write hold/save because I don't know exactly what their roles are. It looks like they're both closers right now, but I can't count on that. I'd say that Tepera and Trinan are my 2 like kind of lockdown holds guys. I don't think either of them are going to pick up many saves this year unless Carroll falters, but so really based on last week's results, I guess the best way to put it is I'm still trying to understand what the roles are. I think Melanson and Robertson are cheap saves guys. Trinan and Tapera are holds guys, and Warren and Bednar are the guys who will kind of move back and forth. I feel very comfortable with that. The lack of holds has more to do with who I started. I did start all of my saves, guys who could potentially pick up saves at the end of the week, because I saw that I had that was the one of the few statistics where I had the opportunity to catch my opponent.
Yeah. It was compelling to me because you won saves, and when I looked at your results, you only got one save each from Bednar and Melanson, who were, I viewed them as your Bednar being number one, and then Melanson your second option, but you were able to get contributions from a couple other relievers.
That was
and then Tapera looking like a really nice pickup, and the way Madden is using him.
right.
There are a couple of skippers like Melvin, Showalter, Madden, who are very linear. You can kind of count on them.
Right.
Be more linear.
Well, I should share one of the things that I do in targeting my bullpen before the season starts, or like before the draft, is I actually look at contract. And so one of the reasons why, if you take Tapera and 4 other potential holds 8th inning relievers, one of the things was when I looked at Tapera, I was like, well, they signed him to, I'll look it up right now, but they signed him to a free agent contract.
Yeah.
And so if a team is signing a reliever to a contract that is, substantial, it means that they're going to want them. They want them in a specific role more than likely. So he signed a 2-year, $14 million deal. So you're paying a reliever that you signed to like $7 million a year. There's a very good chance that a reliever like that is going to have a significant role in the bullpen, right? You're not signing your 5th and 6th inning guy to a $7 million a year contract.
Right. Agreed.
So I would argue that signing a reliever to a $7 million contract in general is not very smart. But fact of the matter is, whether I love his skills or not, which I don't necessarily, I think his results have been a little bit better than what the skills actually say. But I'm going to get holds from him because he's being paid $7 million a year, right? So I do think that that's something to keep an eye on at times, is when looking for specifically holds guys. Like if you look at contract, you can dictate a little bit of what their role might be. But yeah, to answer your question, it was more about, again, I like having that roster flexibility in terms of, if I know I need holds going into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I can plug those guys in. If I know I need saves, I can do that too. That's what having that 6th reliever provides me. And I knew I couldn't catch him in holds, which is why I plugged saves guys in.
Yeah. Well, I was in a similar spot. I won saves as well, but I did not win holds. I was in a tie for that. And despite carrying all the relievers, like we talked about earlier, despite that, I only was able to tie that category. So I was curious your perspective.
Well, a lot of it though, like with holds, it's also luck. Like you said, your team has to be leading. Right?
The game has to fall, but it has to be leading, but not by too much.
Right. So I think that there's some luck involved. I think having relievers that pitch for good teams is super important.
Yeah.
There's some strategy that we can take advantage of, but there's also a decent amount of luck involved with it as well. One more thing to add with the SPRP thing. That's why I roster Max Meyer, the prospect for the Marlins, is I can see a path for him, especially if Miami is decent, where he's a bulk reliever and striking out a ton of hitters and pitching really well, because he's a 2-pitch pitcher, fastball slider with really no third pitch to speak of, and he's 6 feet tall. I think that there's, like, if you just look at him as a scout, you see a reliever, and Miami has a decent amount of pitching already.
Yeah. And
so a way for them to introduce Max Meyer to the major leagues, especially if they're in contention, is to make him more of a bulk reliever. So because he's SPRP, he's potentially someone later in the season that I might be able to plug in to help my ratios. And so I'm more a believer in that role for him than I am thinking that he's going to come up and be a great starter in the second half of the season for me.
Yeah, that's compelling. I would love to see them be in that position where they were motivated to do that, because that means that they're competing.
Right.
And I would like to see that team ascend. I don't have a lot of hope at this point, but it's super early.
Right. That's also for me part of, well, it's also that they're Mariners, but part of the thinking and having both Matt Brash and George Kirby was Brash has, well, he has 3 pitches, but it's 2 breaking pitches and a fastball. And there's a lot of debate as to whether he's going to stick at long-term as a starter or not coming into the season. So if Kirby replaces him, who's the natural replacement, if Brash was to become a reliever, again, that would give me another SPRP down the road. So there was some thought for me in terms of roster building that there might be some future SPRP value in some of the pitchers that I have currently.
Yeah, I'm doing the exact same thing with Ronzi, but in reverse.
Exactly.
He's in the pen, but I think he'll start eventually. On a team that's not as good, but similar type scenario, but in an opposite direction.
He looks phenomenal, by the way.
He really does.
So just a quick pat on the back, I think, for both of us. There are a number of pitchers or a number of players that I think this can transition us to TGFBI, that we identified before the season started as potential breakouts or potential high performers. And I think we're rattling them off one by one right now, right? Ronzi was a pitcher that we had talked about that both of us had identified as a breakout. Both of us targeted in our Fantrax draft. We had talked about drafting in our expert leagues, and he's throwing 97 and with some command, and he looks really, really great. Dylan Cease is one who both of us saw as an SP2 and is just blowing up. He's right now, it looks like, 5-6 innings and 9-10 strikeouts is something we can actually almost count on. Francisco Lindor coming back and being the Francisco Lindor of old. Gavin Lux, Elias Diaz, Manny Machado, even Julio, right? Like Julio's hitting the ball 110 miles an hour every single time he hits the ball.
I love those 2 steals last night.
Dude, he has what, 3 or 4 steals now? Is it 4?
Yeah, man, if you had told me that when we finished our draft, even it didn't matter what point in the season we would ever be in the lead in saves in this league, I laughed you all the way to the farm.
Exactly. Well, and guess who has the highest sprint speed of any player in baseball right now?
I guess he wears 44. That would be my first guess.
That's right. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm really, even Andrew Vaughn, right? Andrew Vaughn is hitting the cover off the ball right now. Logan Gilbert, we roster. Aaron Nola is pitching back up to kind of his potential. So I'm really proud of, I think we put in the work to identify certain players. I think there's a bit of the partnership, I think, is really important, because there was a lot of introducing some of these players to one another throughout this process, and being willing to learn about players that we may not have thought of as ones that we wanted to roster, but being willing to listen to the other person about why these players are potentially good. And I feel like we can say this, we're in first. Like we can actually say that, like there's
We can
something.
say it's early and we're first. It's like I told you the other day. I mean, if we're within earshot at the top 3 to 5 when Ronald comes back, to me, that's a win.
Well, think about this.
Our first round pick hasn't even played yet. He hasn't taken it at bat. So, and we're keeping the ship afloat, no, more than afloat, despite that. So
where did we pick O'Neal Cruz? Right?
16th round, 15, 16, something like that.
Totally. So we also have him on the way. So I just, I look at Bednar and Doval as our relievers, right? Doval has a role. We got him, I would say, semi-late. We were the ones willing to take Verlander. So who knows, right? Who knows where we'll end up at the end of the year. But I do think that at least at first glance, we did.
I see no reason that we don't compete unless we just have injuries.
I don't either. And so I think there's the other thing is I don't feel like it's not like we took these incredible risks and we're reaping the rewards of like, doing wonderfully on every single risk. I think that they were educated guesses about certain players that were based in research and thought. And so it's, to me, it's much more about understanding what it is that you're looking at than it is just throwing a dart at a dartboard, happening to get lucky. But yeah, it's really cool to see.
Yeah. And it's fun, honestly. I mean, it's been enjoyable for me, not only to co-manage with you, but also just to be able to root for play, like to be able to root for Lindor and be excited when he does something great. That's, you know, an opportunity I'm probably not ever going to have in our dynasty league. So it's just really great to you know, roster these players and be in their corner in a different way than I've been in recent years. So with that, let's talk a little bit about our options. So we had kind of a quiet week. And one thing we had talked about was we're a little worried about Turin's playing time. So we're looking at a backup catcher. So we bid on Francisco Mejia, and I honestly anticipate we would get him. I put our bid in at $7. We did not win that bid, and I put in a kind of backup bid for Zach Collins, who is DHing for the Blue Jays and batting 5th or 6th, as well as playing some catcher, because there are injuries they have on their roster. Like he's, I think, a short-term ad. He hit a home run for us yesterday, but he was the player we ended up getting. He's seeing the ball really well right now. Again, I don't think he's a long-term solution, but he was a backup bid, and we only paid $3. And I think we're getting more production, just more, not obviously the production is there, but we're getting more consistent playing time. So that was a nice upgrade. And then Owen Miller, I put in, out of respect for your interests, I put in a bid for Miller, but we did not win that bid. I put in a bid for $7.
They probably went for like 150 or
No,
something.
are you ready for this? I have it ready. His winning bid was, where are you at? $97.
Totally.
$97. Can you believe someone paid $97 for him? But
Well,
it was
based on his airtime on some of these other podcasts. Yeah, I do. That's they'll talk about Owen Miller for 15 minutes.
That's true. But it was a busy week though in our league overall. I mean, there was a lot of dollars spent. So Mackenzie Gore went for 111. Hector Neris went for 110. I would have to think that owner is betting that there's something more serious going on. I can't imagine spending 11% of your budget for 1 week's worth of saves,
right?
Because this is not a holds league. Johan Duran went for 101.
As he should.
That could be more of a stash play. And then in the same bullpen, Pagan for 99. Mercado went for 91. What? Didi Gregorius, 85. Our guy Hassan Kim, who we dropped because he's platooning, went for 77. Alec Baum went for 44. Taylor Ward went for 44. Pache, who we dropped last week, went for 34. So there was some interesting, some serious dollars spent this week. So it was very interesting. And then Francisco Mejia, I mentioned, was our top catcher target because he's swinging the bat really well. And I think he's pretty much in a 50-50 platoon at this point. I don't know what you've seen, Tino, but that's, to my eyes, when I looked at the box score, that's what I've seen. It's pretty much split down the middle. But we just missed him. The winning bid for him was $12 and we bid $7. So that's the challenging part about Fab, is you're just never quite sure where the market's going to be. I'm hoping that I don't regret our missing out on the Mariners pitcher all year. We missed that bid for like $12 in week 1, and I bid what I thought was a really high price at $125. But that's the hard part about this process, is you're just never quite sure where the market's going to value people. I never would have guessed some of these players would be valued this highly. But apparently people had some needs that they need to fill. I'll tell you, man, there's some players that were dropped that I'd be interested in adding, if not soon, like later down the line. Like Keston Hero was dropped. To me, I think that's, if he starts getting more playing time, it's interesting. Dom Smith was dropped as like a corner option. Again, if like JD Davis gets hurt or something like that and his playing time increases. And then Patino was dropped. So he will be back at some point this year. So I don't know. It's interesting. And then Kevin Smith was dropped, who was 3 weeks ago was everyone's cup of tea. But he got dropped. So
Whose cup of tea was Kevin Smith?
I don't. Well, you were talking about Owen Miller. Everyone was talking about him when
Ooh,
he
so
got.
okay, so I just
So
pulled up
like to me,
Owen
when he
Miller's
got
savant. So you pull up Owen Miller's savant page, 84th percentile average exit, 62nd max, 76 hard hit, 86th xWOBA, 91st XBA,
and when are you going to give the caveat about small samples?
sure, 85th X slug, 54th barrel, and 88 sprint speed.
Right.
So
Hey, look, Kevin Smith's not on your team, is not on my team, is not on our team. And I'm just saying when he was traded on the pods, in the community, there was talk of opportunity, power, speed. Everyone started getting really excited.
I think
And then,
so if you think about it, like he's a top 10 prospect for the Blue Jays. He's going to the A's, he's going to play every day. And I think what it is, it's playing time, right?
Sure, absolutely.
But he's not, so here's how I think about it. If Kevin Smith hits his highest, like his 90th percentile potential, what does that season look like? Right? His age 26 season, and he's hit his 90th percentile. What does that season look like?
I think he'd be like a 3-win player. Maybe like a
So what, 270 with 20?
270. That might be high to me. I was gonna say, what's his walk rate? I don't know. I was trying to think OBP.
So let's say 260 with 20, low 20s home runs and probably low teens steals.
I was gonna say by the time he's 26, he's probably like 10 to 12 steals.
Sure. And then runs and RBIs on an A's team in 2 years at max looks like 80, 70, 70, right? So even if Kevin Smith reaches his 90th percentile result, he's still not a player. He's still kind of a middling third baseman, right? He's a third baseman that in our league where we keep 15, where we can draft in the probably either draft in the first couple of rounds or be a bottom level keeper. So who cares? At that point, who cares, right? Even if he reaches his 90th percentile. However, a player like Owen Miller, who I personally don't really like, but a player like Owen Miller who probably will have multi-positional eligibility, who is currently hitting the ball really hard and runs really fast and has made some changes to his approach, is, he's like a good version of Brad Miller, potentially, right? To me, that's worth a little bit more than a Kevin Smith.
Oh, I agree.
So I can understand, and in Cleveland, there's a lot of opportunity. So I can see why someone would look at Owen Miller and say, this is a player I'm going to bid 10% of my budget on. Again, it's not an approach that I might necessarily take, but I do think it's justifiable in the right situation, especially if, say you have like shitty first baseman, right? Or say you need steals and the conventional positions to find steals you can't find. You might look at that 88 sprint speed and say, I think he has the potential to get me 8 steals. And in a roto league such as ours, like that's worth a lot at first base. So I get it. I don't love him. I get it. I just don't know that Owen Miller or Kevin Smith are players that I'm going to cape for and be, build my team around, essentially.
My comment was just how quickly not you and I, we collectively get excited, and then how quickly we are to discard when these young guys don't meet our highest expectations in their first extended look.
Totally.
So that's
well, and I think that our approach, both individually and when we play together, is pretty sound in that I'm going to identify players with skills, and I'm going to watch how they progress. And if there's a point in time where I can pounce on that player because I'm seeing some actual evidence of production, then I will. But I'm going to keep this list of players that I see really incredible skills or potential from. And that's the list from which I'm going to pick, as I move forward, versus waiting for the next player to pop and saying, okay, I'm just going to bid on him because everyone else is, or because that player put up 3 home runs last week, right? I think it's a very, very different approach. And there's more long-term success, I think, in identifying those skills and keeping an eye on players, which is what I think we do subconsciously, right?
One last thing I want to share with you, and we'll move on from TGFBI. That makes me excited. So I swear I don't look at the standings every day. I have them up because I was preparing for this pod. So just looking at the standings, the two teams right behind us within 8 points, they're both very pitching heavy. So if you look at their points, they're much more pitching dominant. We're very balanced. Our hitting and pitching is basically even
50
in terms of the points.
Yeah.
And the people behind us their hitting is way behind their pitching. And again, I look at that and I think Acuna hasn't even played for us yet.
Right.
And we're already, our bats are already that much better than theirs, and Acuna hasn't even played yet. So, and I also know that the primary reason our biggest potential is saves. And we have left a lot of saves on the bench. We have guys who are going to get saved. So I see a lot of potential for growth there still. So that gets me excited about what's ahead in the coming weeks and months. So
yeah, and I also look at the pitching that we have on the bench right now is, I like Tyler Anderson a lot. And I think one injury in the Dodgers pitching staff, and you see Tyler Anderson become a 5 or 6 inning starter. I could see Sewald picking up more saves moving forward. I think that Aroldis Chapman is not a lock in the 9th inning for the Yankees, for whether it's injury, age, or performance, and Chad Green is waiting.
yeah. We just need the M's to get back in that 1-run game mindset, man.
Right? No, I just want them to win. I could care less about the 1 run. We just need them to win.
I care a little bit because you have Streckenrider and
just want them to win. I could care less about. That's the one team where I could care less about fantasy. It's all about whether they win games. The other thing is we'll open up a roster spot when Acuna comes back. That I think, I'm not sure what we're going to do with it yet, but I could see picking up another pitcher with upside.
Yeah,
to be able to
this lineup or this roster is a challenge for me because I'm so used to like just picking guys who I think have potential or I can plug in, and it doesn't work that way. You put guys in for the whole week, and so I'm so used to that daily mindset of just what is my best lineup today,
right.
And I think I have some growth to adjust my mindset when identifying players, of thinking about it in that context of like, what is his weekly value as opposed to potentially his daily value. And I think it's been, and I've said forthrightly, like we've left some saves on the bench, like each week trying to look at the schedule and say, how many games they have? What is the opponent quality? Right. And trying to determine which of our bullpen, which I think we have some really great talented arms, and we have some guys who definitely has some leverage stake in their bullpens, starting with Doval and Bednar, but just trying to look at the schedule each week and go, which of these guys are going to have the highest likelihood to have that opportunity. I've swung and missed more often than not. So
yeah, I think like the Steckenrider versus Sewald. Like Sewald is a much better pitcher, but Sewald is being used anywhere from the 6th to the 8th in the highest leverage situation. Whereas Steckenrider, who's a lesser pitcher, is much more likely to come in the 9th, right? And
yes.
So I guess in this particular format, we play Steckenrider over Sewald, even though Sewald is a much better pitcher. Also, I'm not listening.
I thought their schedule this week was such that, I think if they were playing like Toronto and I don't know, at Colorado, say they're at Interleague, then I would say, okay, I would go away from Sewald. But on weeks where they're playing like the AL West, I kind of want him in there to like pick up maybe a save and then also 3 or 4 really good innings.
Right.
But that gets back to our conversation earlier. And then, again, that's working for us. We've been consistently playing. We've played Tyler Anderson the last 2 weeks.
Right.
He's delivered a sub-1 whip, excellent ratios, good strikeout per inning. Like we're leading the league in ERA and whip. So,
and not because of Reed Detmers.
Not because of Reed Detmers. He has not gotten off to a good start.
Not a fan.
Not because of him.
He's the next pitcher we identify as someone we want to try to pick up with Fab. Detmers is on the train to Cuttsville
we should trade him for Blake Trinan.
Oh my goodness. So that was it. That was an offer that I received in our head-to-head league because I own Trinan, and first of all, I'm not a Detmers fan. I never have been. I think he's a real life number 4 at best. But yeah, I got that offer, and I was not overjoyed, but it's expected with my boy Aaron Horn. All right. So TGFBI, we're in first, doing really well. Excited about Acuna coming back. We'll continue to give updates every week about where we're at with TGFBI. Our next big bucket topic is pitcher injuries and the way that pitchers are being used, or I guess starting pitchers are being used this year, and where the trend is. And we covered some of it already.
Yeah, as I say, I feel like I've covered this. I was referring to my notes when we were talking earlier.
We have. I think that there's the only other real question I have with regards to this is, how do you, given the propensity of injury, like how do you value someone like DeGrom, right? You almost would rather have a pitcher that has Tommy John or has some sort of big surgery, and then you can predict when they're coming back and what that looks like, than investing in someone like DeGrom, where you just don't know when that pitcher is coming back, right?
I would think so, yes.
It's just, I don't know. Pitching feels a bit like fantasy football to me right now. Like, part of the reason why I don't play fantasy football much anymore is that it just felt like whoever got luckiest with injuries was the one who would win. And it had very little to do with skill. And I know that there's a lot of conversation about, how to predict pitcher injury. And there's some ways in which you can kind of look at, highest end velocity and that sort of thing to understand who might get hurt next. But it is scary to me, and it makes me really, really nervous. And I think that I tend to gravitate towards pitchers who are not of the highest velocity, or pitchers who you think have a smoother delivery, right? Like, when I think about Matt Brash, I don't know if I think about him as a keeper. I
Sure.
love him,
Sure.
but his motion and his kind of crossfire delivery is the kind of thing where you can just see his elbow blowing up at any point in time. Whereas George Kirby, who's not in the majors yet, is very much a keeper to me because he throws an easy 98. And his delivery looks like it's something that he can repeat over and over again. But anyways, I think if there's anything in fantasy baseball that keeps me up at night, it's pitcher health. And it's just going to be very, very interesting moving forward.
Yeah, I think I just have two thoughts. I think the first is, I don't think there's any way to know it's going to happen. And I don't think trying to project injuries, I know he's working with Jeff Zimmerman. They do injury projections based on all these other factors. But to me, the only thing that's really informative is the player history, their personal history, their medical history. And to me, the only thing that you can really do as a manager is decide how much risk you want to take on. You're going to have a certain amount of attrition during the year. And right now it is extreme. But it's going to be up and down, but you have control over how much kind of volatility you start with. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And then knowing that you're going to have some unexpected attrition during the year as well. Yeah. And then I think the other thing to me is, we can either continue to just beat the drum and say, like, why don't pitchers go deeper? Or we can just lean in and just embrace, this is the way the game is going. And how do we as fantasy managers not just try to capitalize and make it part of a winning strategy, but also enjoy it? Mm-hmm. I think more so for me, it's more about that than it is about, last year I lost 3 guys to Tommy John, so I'm not going to draft starters. That was not really it. It was more, the game is evolving. How can I evolve the way I assess pitchers and build a staff that's more in line with the talent that's available, and more in line with this, how guys are being used, so that my roster, so I have more flexibility, because guys like you have, having 6 or 7 guys that can go 7 innings every 5 days are harder and harder to come by. So
Well, I think that's
by such your limit, you can aim there, but very few of us are going to be able to achieve that.
right. Well, I think that it's interesting because like part of my liking, like I traded you for Scherzer, and part of what I like about Scherzer is I know his pain tolerance, right? His pain tolerance is so high, and his desire to pitch deep into games is so strong that even if there's a slight drop off in performance, he's a guy who's going to give me innings, right? Unless his arm completely falls off, he was somebody I could count on. And because I had taken on some risk with Carlos Rodon, I felt like I needed to balance a pitcher like Rodon with someone who I knew I was going to get innings from, right?
Right.
Also feel like both Logan Gilbert and Robbie Ray are pitchers who have pitched. Well, Ray has pitched a bunch of innings, and Gilbert is someone who's so into pitch mechanics, and he's such a student of the game that I know that health and longevity and repeatability in his delivery and all those sorts of things are things that he spends tremendous time researching. Doesn't mean he's going to stay healthy, but I'd rather have Logan Gilbert than Sixto Sanchez, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so then there's also, as you said, there's even more value in having those pitchers that can go deep into games now more than ever because there's so few. And so to me, there was a competitive advantage. I think I may have to come around to the idea that there aren't those pitchers anymore a year or two from now, right? Where that's just the way the game is going. So even these guys will get phased out to a certain extent unless the game continues to evolve. But again, there was a competitive advantage in going the opposite direction.
Sure.
Understanding that at least one of those pitchers is probably going to get hurt, maybe 2, maybe 3. Or they're at least like somebody like a Zach Wheeler is going to fall off and not have the season that he had last year. But it's fascinating. And it's such a moving target, right?
Yeah. And it's a weird cocktail right now because the spring was abbreviated and you have guys that are working at a lower velocity. And I think I have to remind myself that these guys are still not fully stretched out, and not because the drop in velocity is also a sign of potential injury. And so sometimes it can be easy to go to worst case scenario in your mind of thinking like he's hurt, something is wrong. Why is he down 2 miles an hour? But I'm trying to balance that with as well. We also have this variable right now of timing and spring training, and some of these pitchers are still not fully ready to where they would be normally right now.
Right. Well, I guess that's a good transition. I like Robbie Ray, right, is someone who is, down 2, I think I have it here, 2.5. Before yesterday's start, he was down 2.8 miles an hour with his fastball, and down 2.5 miles an hour with his slider. He's throwing his curveball differently. His curveball down 6 miles an hour, but that's not an arm thing. That's an adjustment in what they're trying to do. But his horizontal movement on his fastball was 38 or 39% less than the average horizontal movement on a fastball versus last year, where it was 15% above. So his stuff is just not what it was, last year in his Cy Young year. And so everyone was worried about it, but he also pitched in Minnesota where it was, 25 degrees, and then pitched in Chicago when it was pouring down rain. And that was his response. And so do I think that he's exactly the pitcher he was last year? I don't know. There's no way to really know. Do I think that, having played baseball and played basketball in my youth, do I think there's a performance difference when it's freaking 25 degrees out? Absolutely, I do.
Yeah.
Right. That plus the abbreviated spring training to me says, just don't react. Right. Yes. Is it concerning? Yeah. It's something I'm going to watch start to start, but I'm not going to make a decision about my team.
Sure.
You do all the research to figure out the pitcher over the course of, the 5 months of off season. and you're not going to throw that all away because of 2 starts that were in, sub 40-degree weather.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we're both dealing with it, whether it's Wheeler or Ray on your team, or, a Bueller on my team, and Musgrove or Sandy Alcantara struggling with his command early this season.
right.
Like their guys are just not where they normally are. And like you said, you have to trust, hope that there's nothing wrong physically, and just trust that, the skills are going to, get back to where they belong.
Right. Well, I guess with that, how do you deal with some of the metrics that we both like embrace and love? How do you deal with looking at those numbers at this point in the season? We're what, a little over 2 weeks into the season now. And, most pitchers have a couple starts under their belt, and, maybe it might only be like, I don't know, 40, 50 batted ball events to be able to actually look at and determine where those players are at. But how do you deal with the desire to want to look at those numbers versus actually reacting to the numbers that you see?
For pitchers specifically, or both?
Both.
I think for hitters, honestly, I'm doing the best I can just to try to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
With pitchers, I do react to stuff, the stuff plus, because that is actionable really quick, and it's part of the reason, or the genesis behind the research, was to try to find something that was more predictive than a season-long stat, and something that could be more of an indicator of a skill change.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think also walks, and then usage, are things that I'm looking at. If someone's having command problems, I don't care what the skills are. I don't have a lot of patience for that. So that's it. As I evaluate more, there's not guys on my roster, I think, that have a lot of command problems. But when I'm looking at potential ads, it's one of the first things, even this early, I still look at walks. I'm like, what is he doing in terms of balls and strikes? And yeah, again, I'm reacting to stuff, and I'm reacting to how they're being used. Like, what's their spot?
And then hitters.
Again, I'm honestly just trying to avoid it, because like you said, I mean, really, StatCast, I think the minimum plate appearances, or the minimum batted ball events, is around 50 before you can really get anything that's not just noise. And even then, you want to regress back to the league, towards league average, whether it's good or bad. You with a 50 batted ball event sample, I think the other day, was saying the most batted ball events in the league was Matt Wilson at like 31. And that's because he's just seeing the ball really well, and has put a lot more balls in play. Most guys are around like 22 or 20 events so far. So yeah, I'm just trying to, looking at lineup position, is there any platooning going on? A little bit of, if someone has an egregious strikeout rate, or their walk rate has gone way down or something like that, that would be something I would notice. Not dissimilar from spring, honestly. I try to just look at, strikeouts and walks and play discipline in spring, and see if there's any big changes.
Right.
I think this early on, until we get a larger sample for batters, try to keep it really simple and just not overreact, which honestly is a challenge.
So I was thinking about this. So I do an exercise where once a week I update number of batted ball events, launch angle, max exit, average exit, velocity, exit velocity on fly ball / line drive, exit velocity on ground balls, number of 95 plus exit velocity, and then percentage of barrel for hitters. And I agree that 50 batted ball events is where it starts to kind of tell more of a definitive story. But I do think so I try to think about the idea of informative versus what's the word? Like determinate, right? Sure. So there are numbers that can inform you as to something that's going on. And then there are numbers that say you have to make a decision about this player.
Okay.
And I think that at this particular point in time, there are things that are informative. So I'll give you a couple of examples with players on my team. So Wilson Contreras is my only active catcher, right? I have MJ Melendez as my second catcher, who obviously is in the minors right now. With Contreras, I'm probably getting 5 out of 6 days where he's playing. Would it help to have a second catcher in that 6th day? Probably. But Wilson Contreras has 17 batted ball events, and 11 of them were 95 mile per hour plus exit velocity. And his average exit velocity so far this season is 97.2, which is the highest on my team besides Byron Buxton, right? And so when I look at that, I think to myself, Contreras is giving me, there's the potential for Contreras to really produce this year. He's hitting the ball super hard. He's hitting 3rd in the Cubs lineup. I don't know that I need to add that catcher for that 6th day, because I think that the production that I'm going to get from Contreras in that spot is going to carry me. I'd rather use that lineup position somewhere else, right? I look at Kyle Schwarber, and he's got 20 batted ball events, but his launch angle is 7.7 degrees, which is suboptimal, which explains why he's not hitting very well. But he's hitting the ball hard. His max exit is 109.3. His exit velocity on fly ball / line drive is 95.4. And he has 7 out of his 20 batted ball events are 95 plus. So it's a launch angle issue, which has not been an issue for him in the past. And so I'm not going to worry about Kyle Schwarber figuring out his bat. Not that I would make a decision about him and trade him or cut him, but it's just, it puts me at ease. Whereas I look at Adam Frazier, and his average exit velocity is 85 miles an hour. And his launch angle is 16.6 degrees, which is optimal for someone hitting for power, but may not be optimal for someone like Adam Frazier, who's just trying to get on base. The reason why I still have him on my team is he's second base and outfield eligible, and he gives me a safety net for Colton Wong when Colton Wong goes against left-handers. He's also hitting at the top of a lineup. But that launch angle says to me, in a 2.9% barrel rate, even though it's 34 batted ball events, he's a player that I might cut. He might be the first on the cut list when it's time for me to activate Acuna, or I find somebody that I want, because he's elevating the ball too much as a hitter that doesn't have any power, right? So I can go on and on with my own team and talk about like some of these metrics that they don't tell me what to do with the player, but they give me some information as to what to look for moving forward with the player. It's the reason why Tommy Pham is one of my favorite players, right?
Yeah.
Tommy Pham is not produced in 2.5 years, but he's got a 96 mile an hour average on fly balls and line drives, and 7 of his 18 batted ball events are 95 plus. And we've seen him hit 2 home runs in 2 days. And I think that's part of the reason why. So anyways, hitters, I think that there's a difference between informative versus like determinate. And that's part of why I still keep track of this stuff, even though it's early on in the season. And then with pitchers, really it's about obviously velocity, right? You can see if a pitcher is on the decline, if you have decreased velocity over the course of a number of starts or a number of appearances. And then finding differences in pitch shape and movement can tell you if a pitcher has made significant changes to their repertoire, and if you might be able to see a potential increase early on in their production because of it. So Logan Gilbert has really changed the shape of his slider, right? So Logan Gilbert last year threw his slider 2.3 miles an hour slower than he's throwing it this year. And the shape of it was, last year it was vertical movement was 8% less than average and 10% less horizontal. And this year it's 6% less vertical, but it's 27% more horizontal. And so he's got a really different shape on his slider, and he's throwing it harder, and he's getting better results because of it, right? So those kinds of things you can find, I think, even within a couple of appearances. And to me, that's super, super interesting. Anyways, the other thing is it's an excuse to keep track of this stuff, and we miss numbers and we want to be able to play with them. And this is a way for me to be able to do it. Also, it made me really that much more sad to see Byron Buxton get hurt because all of his numbers are completely off the charts.
Yep. He's something else.
He is 98.3% average exit, 112.3 max in 14 batted ball events. He had 5 barrels and his hard hit percentage was 57.1%. It's crazy.
That's why he was my number 6 outfielder.
I love him. All right. So do we want to do quick player analysis or do we want to move on to stories?
I want to share a couple things about players. We haven't really talked about too many hitters other than you going into some of your data on your team there. I wanted to highlight a player who I no longer roster in Tantrax, but who's doing some really exciting things, and that's Alex Verdugo. And Tino talked about, small samples, and we talked about the danger of drawing too many conclusions. So all of those caveats aside, Verdugo is a player that I've admired for several reasons. One is, I think, as we talked about on the pod, I don't remember what episode, his journey from LA to Boston, kind of reshaping his image, maturing as a person, as a player. I love the fact that he does a little bit of everything. He's a balanced ball player. He pitched in college and high school. He's a great left fielder. I think he leads the league in defensive runs saved in the outfield so far this year.
Left field.
What's that?
Is it left field or outfield?
I think it's left field. I know it's super high, and forgive me for not having the exact stat, but anyway, he's 25. I've had him on my roster for the last couple of years. I traded him because I was not going to keep him. I think you pinned him as a number 3 outfielder on a championship team.
Yep.
We play in a 3 outfielder league, and he was someone that could, deliver a batting average, give you 10 to 15 steals, maybe, and 10 to 15 home runs, maybe, bat somewhere in the middle of the lineup. But, I just started to question, from a fantasy perspective, no matter my love for the player, is he really going to deliver enough categorical weight to hold? And that's why I moved him for a draft pick. But he's doing some really exciting things to me. And he's going into his age, or he is 25 years old. So he's entering his peak. He is hitting the ball harder than he ever has. He is lifting the ball at a higher degree than he ever has. His barrel right now again is 11.8%. His previous high is 7.3. His launch angle is 12.5. His previous high was 9. He has hit 3 pulled home runs, which means he's tapping into pull power, which is what he needs probably to hit home runs. But all of his home runs have been to right and right center. Have been pretty prodigious shots. They're not wall scrapers. His hard hit rate is 51.5%. All of his X stats, whether it be on base, batting average, or slug, are in the above 90 percentile. And he's batting 5th every day in front of Trevor Story. So, if he maintains this pace, he's obviously going to regress a little bit. He's right now, he's batting 333, 395, 639. He's obviously going to slow down a little bit, but if he's batting 5th every day for Boston and continues this, he could have 110 RBIs, which is just not something I ever would have thought for his profile. And I know that, I've heard talk of, if you look for kind of what Jesse Winker did 2 years ago, and you try to find the next player who could potentially have that kind of breakout, what was it that Winker brought to the table? He brought really great play discipline. He got really great bat to ball skills. He really had idea at the strike zone. He had all fields approach. And you just think if he could just tap into that power, if he could just lift the ball, if he could just pull the ball, and he brings that approach, I'm not predicting that's the season Alex is going to have, but he's definitely doing things he's never done before, and he's entering his peak as a player. I just think it's exciting to see him hold the plate skills he has. And he's walked more times than he's struck out this year so far, and really starting to produce power wise. So it gives me a lot of regret that he's no longer on my team, but I'm excited to see what he's doing because I think he's a fun player and I just enjoy him a lot. So I just wanted to highlight what he's doing so far.
I've always liked Verdugo, and I've never thought of him. I always thought of him as, his peak season being like 310 and, maybe 18 to 20 home runs, right? because obviously he's got a pretty great hit tool. He always has. He hits lefties like, but he was like, I feel like we could build an all-star team of increased, if they only increase their launch angle, this is who they are. And I think of Verdugo, I think of certainly of Key Brian Hayes, Alec Boehm. There's a bunch of players that we can put on that list. What's interesting about Verdugo, and I think about Hayes too, is, and we've talked about this recently, if you examine the player a little bit more, like from a personality perspective, the type of player that they are, how much they care about the game, are they a grinder? Are they the type of players that eat, sleep, breathe baseball? Verdugo and Hayes are those kinds of players, right? The kinds of players that'll do anything to get better. And, you know, probably devote too much of their day towards being a baseball player. But those are the players you can trust to try to tweak and make things better for themselves. And so while I didn't expect this from Verdugo, I'm not surprised that he started this way, because he's always come across as that type of player to me. And everything that I've learned about him is just that baseball is his entire life. And so he needed some instruction, and then probably needed to mature a bit to get to a place where he was willing to accept some of that instruction. But it is very cool to see. And you look at his numbers, yes, xWOBA is 92nd percentile, and XBA is 93rd percentile, and xSlug is 97th percentile. His K percentage is 94th percentile, right? Whiff percentage is 89th percentile. Like, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
My only knock on him, and why I would be excited about him, but I don't know that I would rush to deal for him fantasy wise, is he doesn't steal bags.
Yeah, his spin speed is down to 13%. I saw that. I'm like, that's got to be a misprint.
He's
I mean, he was at least league average, but he's getting slower.
right.
And he looks a little thicker too.
So is his profile, like, is he, you know, he might be a better average, slightly less power version of Kyle Schwarber, right? Without the first base eligibility.
Yeah, I don't know.
Which is still a very good player, and still
Yeah.
very much a player that I would want to roster. He's just, I try not to have too many players where I have to think, okay, if I have this player, I need two other outfielders who are going to steal me 20, 30 bases, right?
Yeah, that's, again, it's hard decisions, but
right. But the excitement around his development, and just as a baseball fan, like, Verdugo is also Mexican. So for me, there's like an added investment in wanting to see him perform. He is a favorite of mine, and it's really fun to see him perform at this level, especially because he was the headliner in the Betts deal, right? And so
yeah, exactly.
Tremendous pressure on him to perform in Boston because he was the headliner. And so to see him do this so far this season is really, really cool. I totally agree.
Yeah, it's fun. And again, I know Matt, if he's listening, when he listens, he's been on core for 2 years. You know, again, Verdugo has been on my roster, and he and I have bemoaned like his position in the batting order, and why isn't he hitting second? Why isn't he hitting high in the order? But I think this version, again, you know, it is hard from a fantasy perspective, and outfield you're getting potentially very low steals. But this, if he's going to be this version of himself, and he's going to be a middle of the bat run producer, and again, it's a different version than what I thought he would be, but that's also pretty exciting from a fantasy perspective as well.
I'm sorry, Alex Cora has won 2 World Series.
I know.
It does not matter whatever he chooses to do. The other thing is, look how bad they were when he was suspended for a year.
Oh, it's true. I mean, I can't say he's not good. He's not
a great manager. He may not do what we like fantasy wise, but he's
for sure
phenomenal manager. There's very, very difficult.
All the Houston stuff aside and all that. I mean, he clearly, again, I only say that because I just is interesting. This kind of unexpected turn with Verdugo is just really interesting. And then the pitcher I wanted to highlight goes a lot, honestly, with on theme of what we talked about, versatility. And isn't, again, not a player that you either have, but he's one of my just more fascinating pitchers, and that's Garrett Whitlock. Mm-hmm. I don't know how Fantrax calculates player value, and I don't particularly care because I don't particularly place any stock in it. Mm-hmm. But just for this argument alone, so far this season, he's the number 11th most valuable pitcher so far, and number 20th overall player, mm-hmm. Which is just interesting because he has pitched 9 innings, 9 2/3. He has a win and a save already. His K minus BB is 11-2. He's made 4 appearances. He's appeared in the 6th inning 3 times. He appeared in the 9th inning for a save once. He's only given up 1 run all year. To me, he just kind of typifies what we've talked about and what I've tried to highlight about these mining value with skilled pitchers, no matter of the role. He was someone that I think at one point in our draft, was like, hey, I really like Whitlock. I don't know what he's going to be, but I think no matter what he does, he'll be good. And we went with more clarity and with good reason, because it's hard to invest a draft pick when you don't know exactly what you're getting.
Right.
Was he going to be a starter? Was he going to be a middle reliever? Was he going to be a bullpen or a closer? All those things were on the table, but it's pretty cool to see someone that just can do a little bit of everything. He's had a two inning appearances, a 4-inning appearance, and again the 1-inning save. His stuff is up. His stuff plus is up this year. His location plus continues to be excellent. He's getting more ride on his 4-seam. The drop it's not dropping nearly as much, and his sinker, which was his best pitch last year, is performing exactly the same. So it looks like maybe he's working more vertically, like lower and upper in the zone. So I don't have a lot to dig in on his arsenal other than the fact that his stuff is up, and I would attribute that to the fact that he's getting more ride on his 4-seam.
The difference in the 4-seam vertically is 20% to league average. So last year his 4-seam vertical movement was 7% less than average, and this year it's 13% more than average. So you're right. There's much more ride on his 4-seamer than there was last year, and is much less horizontal movement. So he's changed that a bit. He went from 42% above average to 9% above average. The other big shift in his pitch arsenal is his, so he doesn't throw his changeup a ton. Well, excuse me, hold on. So his slider. So his slider, he's thrown 26 times this year. And last year, his slider had, it was negative 41% horizontal break to average. And this year it's negative 70. So he's changed the shape of his slider a bit, but he's also slowed it down. And so it's turned into more of almost like a curveball than it is in a slider. So there's been some tweaks that he's made to his arsenal that are really different. But I think he's almost like the prototype for what we were talking about as far as having flexibility in what your pitchers do and still getting good ratios, and then potentially, unpredicted saves, holds, and wins, and just finding pitchers who have really great skills and ride those and make your roster full of those guys and ride those guys out.
Yeah. He's kind of you mentioned McHugh earlier. I mean, yep. Whitlock came with a price this year, like McHugh. I mean, everyone, right. I don't think, again, I appreciated what you said about slider, and I started to look at his arsenal and kind of did a brief glance of what I saw. I don't think his skills have elevated. This is what he did last year. Right. And that's why it cost them, to acquire him this year, because people knew they were getting a talented pitcher. So you had to be particularly clever to know that he's good. Right. I just think the murkiness around exactly what kind of good he was going to be maybe pushes maybe makes us devalue him a little bit more than maybe we should. We being collective, we, not you and I. Right. I don't know. He was just, as I did this podcast or was prepping, and I think, who did I want to highlight? I thought he's just a great player to highlight in terms of things we've talked about and the value to be had, and kind of just interesting, compelling player with a really great skill set, who does great things for Boston, and he does great things for your fantasy team.
I was going to ask you, I wonder, so if we take Whitlock and we take McHugh and, I don't know, Bickford and Ashby and Suter in previous years, and, you start to, or maybe even a Seawald, you start to take all of these pitchers who have great skills, who are not necessarily role defined, right? But provide tremendous value to your teams. I asked the question, are we undervaluing those pitchers currently? And where do you see, this time next year, right? There's probably going to be twice as many as there were this year that were identifiable. Tanner Houck, Where do you see those pitchers going? And at what point are we going to start to overvalue some of those pitchers with those skill sets?
I think the ones who do step out and do show that they have value in there will be overpriced, and the really savvy move will be to identify the next one,
Right.
and pay the lower price. But in terms of will people adapt, we'll see how many there are. I think it would have to be a strategy that's either really successful in like a high profile league where it gets talked about on like pods and things like that. I mean, honestly, like if I was fortunate enough to win this year, theoretical, I don't think people will look at my roster and go, well, let's see what Aaron did. I don't think that's how this league runs. You know what I mean? I think I look at Doug's roster last year to see like
I did that with Murph.
Yeah, but I mean, I do that with everybody. So, I think I'm the exception. I don't know. I think it would have to be something really industry wide for people really to step up. Otherwise, they're just going to take the guys who were good last year.
Right.
Like, hey, this guy was good last year, I'm going to take him. So, I'm not saying that people are not to discredit people. I just think it would take a lot of time before you would see like a widespread mind shift change, unless again there was something like a format change or someone at like NFBC or labor or something like that did really well with a strategy like that, and it became really popular. Right. Kind of like pocket aces, right? Like anytime someone prioritizes starting pitchers earlier, and I don't know who started that, but that's kind of become a thing, like where you do pocket aces.
I cannot stand that strategy because your offense is shit. And it's easier, in my opinion, it's easier to mine pitching that other people don't see than it is to find hitters that are going to become great that others don't see. It's easier to find. Pitching is more volatile and there's more injury. I don't know. To me, it makes no sense. Tangential question for you. How much do you pay attention to what methods are successful with other teams, right? Because Smurf won last year, and I feel like people have kind of taken on a copycat sort of perspective with him as far as types of players he values, ages of players he values, track record, all sorts of things, right? In our particular league, which I think is a good microcosm for other leagues. How much do you pay attention to what other teams do and how they're constructed, and how do you implement that?
I think say less than 50%. I don't think it's something I do rely on a ton. Part of it, I think, is maybe just a little bit of stubbornness and wanting to define my own approach. But I do think I look at other teams that, especially when someone has repeated success. So just to shift away, because I think Doug gets a lot of it talk because he's won, which he deserves. But like Brandon, for instance, is someone I talk a lot to about pitching. So because I think he and I think about pitching and value pitching in a similar way. So I will look at what he's doing with his team from a pitching side specifically. I look at like how different teams handle prospects. I look at how teams handle like the catcher or util position, like what kind of the thought process there. And I think sometimes I look not necessarily to inform my own decisions, but also to look, are there ways that I can get in a competitive advantage? I would say that my decision to carry 2 catchers was partly based on observations of the league last year. And again, that wasn't based on me trying to mimic something that I saw done, but more just, this is what I see done, and this is where I think I can maybe get an edge, a small edge, perhaps.
It's interesting because especially listening to all of the other podcasts, there's a lot of groupthink. I think there's always going to be a lot of groupthink in anything that is as dynamic as fantasy baseball is. And I don't think, for me, it's not intentional. And I think that I'm too far extreme the other way, but I really don't pay attention to what other teams do. I think that there's this stubbornness in wanting to do it my way and wanting to
I relate to that.
be like, if I'm going to win, I'm going to win because I'm winning and not because I'm copying someone else.
Sure.
And I don't know if that's probably not the right way to go about it, but I just think that's always been my mentality. When I do look, I wouldn't say I look at other teams, but what I try to do is identify my own weaknesses. And once I've identified my own weaknesses, then I go looking for solutions. And that's more of looking at best practices of other teams than it is trying to look at other teams overall. But to me, most of it is just logic, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not going to start in our league because errors are a category. You're not going to start a shortstop in the utility position.
Well, you might.
You might, but to me, that's just not the right thing to do, right? Or, we all have different perspectives on what to do with our minor league players. And
Yes, I would say that's very widespread.
And, that's something I believe I have a very definitive opinion on.
Yeah.
And I think until my opinion is proven wrong, it's something I'll stick to. But something like relievers, I think relief pitching has been a huge weakness for me for a number of years now. And I really took the time to dive in and try to understand, like, where are my deficiencies? What have I been doing wrong? And how do I change this? And some of it is just my own learning about relief. And then some of it is looking at what other people have done. But it's just interesting to see, how we all learn from each other and how much we're willing to embrace and accept best practices of others versus wanting it to be our own. To me,
I have one other thought of things, something I look at, and this is not something I cracked yet, but something I have studied, and again, I have not quite connected the dots, is looking at like the standings. So if you go to standings and then you can go to like categorical standings, trying to look at where do strengths and weaknesses in those categories relate to the results that we see, because we're not measured by that. I mean, our site tracks that, but looking at head-to-head results and league standings and players that are teams that are doing well, trying to kind of correlate it, because it's harder for me to draw conclusions about a head-to-head result. But when I look at the standings of, again, looking at team composition, like, okay, they're really, so they're high in OPS. So what does that mean for hits and home runs? Or okay, they have a lot of hits, but did that come at the cost of power? Or you know what I mean? Or were the teams that were really good at saves also really good at holds?
Right.
Are those things related? Trying to just, again, make categorical connections between head-to-head results and some of those category relationships. But it's still very much in process for me. It's something I've thought about, I look at, but I have not developed a great system for really trying to get a lot of insight out of it yet. But I think there's something there, but I just haven't grasped it yet.
It's funny because it's something I've thought about a ton, right? But here's where I draw the line as far as being a baseball fan and a fan of the players on my team versus playing fantasy in this format, because I want to start the players that I enjoy watching, right? And I would say that of my team, probably 80% of the players I really, really like. And so I don't tend to look at who I'm playing and the composition of their team and what categories they're strong in until I head into the weekend, right? I think Thursday or Friday is when I look at where we are head to head, and I make some decisions about who to start and who not to start, right? So going into the last weekend, I knew that I had a shot to win steals and I had a shot to win saves. Those were the two categories where there was some wiggle room. And so there were a couple of roster or start lineup decisions that I made where I started, who was it? I think I started somebody over, maybe it was like McCutcheon over Schwarber, something like that, where Schwarber had the favorable matchup. but I had an opportunity to pick up a steal instead. And so having roster flexibility to be able to make those sorts of decisions at the end of the week has become more and more important to me. But I'm not starting, I'm not starting someone that I don't like. I'm not starting Brad Miller over Yohan Moncada because it theoretically gives me an advantage over my opponent.
Right.
I'm starting Yohan Moncada because Yohan Moncada is my guy. Right.
Yeah, I agreed with you on that. I think especially early in the week, you got to start your best lineup, and I, like you, I've tried to adopt through encouragement from Matt to like look at those weekend adjustments, but yeah, I think you got to start your best lineup and not get too much in your head. Right. I think for me, what I was mentioning about like those categories is more like end of season analysis and trying to understand.
Yes.
Well, but ultimately how to adjust construction.
I think ultimately I agree, but I think without going into it too far, if we just try to put together the best team possible and then understand on the fly how to adjust or how to have flexibility to adjust to competition, to me, that's at least that's my approach, right? We can all get twisted up in knots trying to figure out which category is more important, what correlates with what. And I do think there's something there, but I think there's more value in simply finding the best players, but also having the flexibility to push on certain categories at different times, right? How do you that's why Luis Urias was hard for me to give up, because he's going to hit for power and I could plug him in at 3 different positions. Or an Adam Frazier still on my team because he has second and outfield eligibility. If I need hits going into a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I can play him over a Schwarber, right? That to me is even more important than it is to the flexibility is what's most important, I guess is what I'm getting at.
No, I think flexibility is huge. I mean, that was a huge priority for me. Everyone on my bench plays at least 2 positions, and that's completely intentional.
Right. So if we can take a quick break real quickly, we'll come back with a few baseball stories and a little bit of open forum to close it out. And we're back. A little snack, a little reprieve. All right, so we're going to finish it up with some baseball stories and a little bit of open forum. How do you feel baseball being back?
It was good. My watching habits have changed with my job a lot. Going from the West Coast where all the games start earlier, it's just been a big adjustment. And I don't have quite as much freedom at my desk, it sounds like, as you do, but just figuring out like when I can stay in touch with the games, get my pacing down. The 7 o'clock games start right when I get up. So I'm still kind of trying to find my groove, honestly, but the last 2 weekends I've made time on Sunday to sit down and watch games. I'm going to continue to do that. Or that's kind of my recovery day, and I'm going to take that time for myself to get the split screen going and really take it all in. So
are you able to watch any games in their entirety?
Yeah, Sunday I can.
Nice. That's me. I'm in the same boat. Like I said, I watch the MLB condensed games when I get home from work at night. And that's, I don't know, it ends up being about a little over an hour typically, because they're about 7 minutes a piece. And then, listen to Mariners games, both at work and at home if they're on, and then prioritize Saturday and Sunday to be able to actually watch full games throughout the day if I can. And always Mariners, right? Always prioritizing Mariners games over others. Are there any series or any games that are coming up that you're looking forward to this week?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple, but I also want to share a couple quick stories that I thought you would find humorous or enjoyable from this past weekend. I was on Sunday, I was watching on the primary screen, I had Ashby, the Milwaukee was playing the Cardinals. And so I was watching him on the primary screen and I was following it on Savant on my phone, like as he pitched. And then I had 3 other games of the Giants were on, the Rays were on. And yeah, so just watching him, and I was just trying to figure out and just analyze his arsenal and try to understand like what is going to take for him to kind of like put it all together. Cause I kind of feel like he was kind of like made in a lab, like all his pitches do all this stuff and you see how much movement they have. And sometimes it's a challenge for him to harness it. And the Cardinals did a great job of like not swinging and just fouling pitches off that they knew they couldn't do anything with, just to drive up his pitch count. I get annoyed the shit out of him, but it was super smart. So I was just like thinking, like, is this guy really like maybe he's just good, in all the ways that we analyze the game, and maybe he's not going to be a good pitcher. And that's not necessarily where I concluded to, but like I was thinking about it as I was watching it. So I thought you would enjoy that. And then also the following night, Laura wanted to watch a movie. It turned out to be a 3-hour movie. I didn't anticipate that. And so we get a couple hours in, and at this point, like I'm grateful to be on the couch with her. I'll do that 10 times out of 10. But I can take her leave the movie at this point because it's lost my interest. So I turned on my MacBook and I had 2 games on my MacBook with this dimness turned down. I had a split screen of the Angels and Astros and the Rays and the Cubs. Awesome. And then on my phone, I was following on the At Bat app. I was following the Brewers game, the Brewers Pirates. And during this, like in the dark with her, like on the couch, I'm like looking at my phone. Yelich hits a grand slam.
Yep.
I wanted to jump off that couch so bad. I was so excited because on the At Bat app, when the pitch comes in and then it turns blue if it's a hit.
Right.
It says in play runs.
Right.
And you don't know what's going to happen. And you're like waiting for it. I was like coming out of my skin and I just awesome. Like, I stayed calm. It's all right. So I just texted you and Matt in all caps, Yelich. Right. That's all I did.
That's hilarious.
That's all I did. But I wanted to scream so bad. But I held it all in.
I love it. That's funny. That same Sunday, I will take at the beginning of the week, I'll look at the baseball schedule and I'll put in my calendar all the Mariners games and then any game in which I have a starter going, right? So in my calendar for the week, I've got all these games that I'm not going to be able to watch necessarily, but I just want to know are on, or I can watch the Gamecast on my phone. So Sunday I was super excited because Wheeler was starting at 10 and then Brash was starting at 1. And Wheeler obviously got lit up by the Marlins, and he's probably the most questionable starter I have as of right now. It made me a bit nervous. And so I was kind of down and, I was watching by myself and then the Brash start happened where obviously he went, he at one point he had 5 innings and 6 walks and 5 Ks and no hits and no runs. Just this weird Matt Brash random start. But it was funny to me because I was so excited for Sunday and to watch my 2 starters, and Wheeler was such a letdown, and Brash I didn't know whether to be let down or excited, or I have no freaking idea what to make of Matt Brash as of right now. Right. But it was just, that's my memory of last week is all the different things. It's, being so excited for that day. And I hate to say that I'm taking Carlos Rodon for granted right now, but I kind of am taking for granted like 5 or 6 innings and double-digit Ks. Yeah. And then the only other 2 things from last week are knowing that Julio is going to be great. Seeing, we all know Julio has been called out on strikes more on pitches that were not actual strikes than any other player in the majors. He's also seeing more breaking balls than any other player in the majors. He also has the highest sprint speed of any player in the majors. And it's been fun to see Kelenic be able to hit the ball hard and start hitting home runs. This upcoming week, the Mariners are playing the Rangers at home and then the Royals at home. So I have 2 Robbie Ray starts to watch, which I think will be very indicative of where his health actually is because his velocity's been down. Yesterday against Texas, it was a little bit increased. The weather was a little bit warmer. He only had 4 strikeouts in 6 innings, and so I want to see that number come up, but I'm encouraged by the fact that the velocity was up. And then Brash against Kansas City, I think will be I think it's a good matchup for Brash. I expect to see him pitch really well. I have other starters going too, but those are the ones that and then watching Wheeler to see if Wheeler can kind of bounce back against Milwaukee this week. What are you watching this week?
So looking forward to this weekend. I do have to work all weekend. I get 5 days off after this stretch normally, but so I'll be watching the Dodgers and Padres late at night because that's going to be this. When I looked at this series, that was the one at night that I was most interested in, and that there's some nice competitiveness back and forth between those two teams. And I have a lot of players on both sides, so that'll be. And then for Sunday, I'm tabbing Milwaukee at Philly. I really want to watch some of that. I don't know who the pitching matchups are yet. And then also the Tigers, interesting, are going cross league to Colorado. So see Torque and the Tigers in Coors is also something I want to check out.
That's awesome.
We need to have Hunter Green watching parties because neither of us roster him. And I just think we need to get together and watch him pitch the way we used to watch the KBO.
I agree.
And then we can invite Matt and swear at him.
Yeah. The idea for me, I could have pretty easily had Green and Brash is a little bit there's some regret in not keeping him, but I'm excited that one of the three of us still has Hunter Green. He's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Along those Hunter Green lines, just real quick, did you have any sort of reaction to me picking up Roki Sasaki after his perfect?
You asked me that the last spot, and I told you I thought it was super compelling.
Oh, you're right. I did.
But I just don't know. I'm not clear about the posting, and when I'll have the opportunity to come stateside. But
7 years from now.
Yeah. So I mean, it could be the longest hold, or he could post in 2 years. I mean, who knows? So I will tell you, I was thrilled to get Yuri Perez. I will tell you that.
Yeah.
I read some things about him recently about how they're treating him, and my guy Sandy is taking him under his wing. Apparently, they have a really close relationship, and you know how I feel about him, and so it just endeared me to him even more.
Right.
And of course, I love you, Matt. Told me he was untouchable, and then 3 days later, he's offering him to me. So I was like, that's the great thing about Matt. You just never know. But I'm thrilled to have him and Cartea as my super young, hopefully super premium someday arms.
And Perez has been the youngest player in his league for what, 2 years now? Is that right?
He was the youngest player to ever start at AA.
No, he's super intriguing, super interesting. I still don't know if I trust the like, it sounds funny to say because the Marlins have always had great pitching, but their pitching development program seems to be a little bit all over the board. I like Rogers and Alcantara have been great, and obviously the history with Fernandez and Beckett all the way back, but I don't know, like they haven't been able to teach Meyer the slider yet, right? And I think Sixto is a one-off because his work ethic is so bad. But it'll be interesting. Everything I've heard about Perez is that he's a hard worker and studious and is ready to rock.
I don't know. I think I mean, each of us who we are who we are, but I think we do nudge each other in certain directions, and I think I have started to, like, for a player, I think, you got to take a shot on a phenom once in a while, right? You got to if you're going to hold that spot, you want to go for someone that can be a top player at his position.
Right. Well, so, and it's fun.
You got to take a swing.
Similar to the conversation we had about checking your opponent and trying to figure out who you want to start at the beginning of the week. Like at a certain point in time, you want to start who you want to start. And at a certain point in time, you want to roster, especially in minor league positions, players that you can hope become superstars, right? Like, I know I beat this drum every week and it's obnoxious, but like, that's why I have Julio. It's literally why I have Julio, right? It's just, it is what it is. I think you have to do that.
All right, brother. I got to wrap it up, man.
Cool. I think, we actually covered my open forum question. Cool. So we'll be back on Saturday with like 45 minutes to an hour, just recapping some of the games that we've watched. We might be able to wrangle Matt or one of the other members into being a guest for a little while. But this will be the format moving forward, is a long one on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then a shorter one on the weekend.
I
Cool.
look forward to it.
Likewise. Happy baseball.
Thank you. Always.
Brother.